Shadows is really, it's a warning and it's a description of the time in which we live.
Yeah, that's a hard. I've almost worried about this song because if you want to read between the lines, it's political.
Right.
And it's saying something about the last presidency of the United States, and it's not affirming in any way, shape. If you want to
But
look,
this sounds like a song that you had to write as opposed to a song you wanted to write.
Yeah, the song almost happened to me more than anything. And there's two things that were behind it. One is this was last February. And Australia was on fire, and I was watching the news, and they're saying, like half a billion animals have perished, and you're kind of going that the magnitude of that is just so shocking, and the anger for me in terms of the global leadership that has resisted tackling what we're going to deal with. Now we can deal with it in our generation, or we can leave it to the next generation, and it's going to be harder for them. And it's time to put on our big boy pants and our big girl pants and be responsible. We inherited a mess. It's not all our fault, but we're the ones alive right now making decisions that are going to affect everybody. And so part of me kind of going, frustration. So at the same time, we've got the whole, not even going to say the name, the last presidency and all that's going on there, and trauma for me. Not understanding how the church can get behind something that, to me, seems patently wicked. I don't, I get in trouble for this. I was at a conference in the States, a Christian conference, and there's a well-known American evangelical pastor. And after giving a really good opening talk at this conference, someone asked him publicly the question, like, we're in this kind of divided era, in politics, that's very caustic and acrimonious. And do you have anything to say? And this is a guy who's famous he's committed to not making political statements. That's not his job. He's a Bible teacher. And he says, well, I can say this. And then this just was shocking to me. He said, that the sun is setting on a civilization when its small men start to cast long shadows. And I'm kind of thinking, wow, you just said that, in an environment and in a cultural situation where that would not be received well necessarily. Yeah. And it never left me. And that
clearly,
And so then, several months later, that, along with the Australia firing, it suddenly just came together in a song, kind of out of nowhere. So bam, there it was, and it came out. And I had to decide whether I was going to include it or just, or not. And so I put it on, and I thought I'd get some pushback on it. So far, either nobody's noticed or didn't understand it or whatever.
Well, I think whatever your political view, I think anyone can listen to the song and relate to the angst.
Yep.
Right. And I think, there's a portrait of you at the front of the book for this album titled Fighting for the Song.
Yes.
And when I look at that image, that's sort of the Steve Bell I see writing this song. I see in your eyes that angst, that concern that I hear in the song. I see in your eyes in that portrait.
Oh, definitely. And actually, what's interesting that I sat down for that portrait right at the time when I was writing that song. So I either had just written the song, I can't remember exactly, or I wrote it shortly afterward. But I remember sitting for this portrait, and normally, which we'd in the way you do it now is you get some guy and you take a bunch of pictures, and then the artist picks which picture they're gonna do, and then they work with that picture. So I sat there with this artist, Roger Schmidt, and for about 3 hours, him taking pictures of me as we chatted. And at the end, we're going through all of the photos, and all the ones where I was trying to smile just looked fakey. They looked strained. It's sort of like, geez, like relax, like, someone give this guy like a sedative, and what we realized is that I was unhappy. I was disconcerted. I was not comfortable. And part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to rage. I don't know, like, but I was not happy. And he said, you know what, that's the truth-telling pose. Let's do that one. And so he did. Wow. And then when it came out, I looked at this thing, well, we can't use this. We can't use this on an album. I should be happy. I should be welcoming and stuff. And he said, no, that's where we're at right now. So we put it in.
It's a very honest image. And I think that, again, in this time, people looking at that photo will see themselves reflected back. I really do. Yeah. Because we've all had that moment this past year. Some of us have lived in the moment for several months, and I think whatever your political bent, I think you can still relate to the angst.
Yes, and I think you're right. I think what that's saying is actually true for anybody on any side of any of these debates.
That's right. Yeah.
And one of the traumas of the last 4 years, and I don't know how to necessarily talk about this, is part of the angst is that we're starting to realize that we have enemies amongst our friends. And what I mean by that is ideological enemies.
Yes.
Right. And what do you do with that?
That has been laid bare.
That's been laid bare. I have people who I adore, who I've discovered now think very differently than I do in this last 4 years, and it's a problem. Yeah. What do I do with that? What do I do with that information? And so that's part also of the strain and the struggle of this time, is that enemies, and I mean that lightly. I mean, these are not people that can actually like take each other out, but how do I deal with that? How do I deal with the fact that people who I respect and I adore, but I'm having real trouble with their opinion on this or that?
Yeah.
And it matters.
It does. I think it's very startling when people with whom you assumed you were on the same page, you find out you're not reading the same book.
Right.
And that can be startling. Yeah.
And it's startling to them too.
Sure.
Like do I tell people now, like if a conservative evangelical church calls up Steve Bell and says, will you come and do a concert in our church? Do I tell them, just so you know, I'm not on the same page on these 3 issues? Right. And I think you're probably on. Like, do you need to know that? Does it matter? Like,
and I think that's something we're all dealing with now. We're trying to figure out where we are on the spectrum and where that fits with all of our relationships.
And how do you do that with respect? And how do we do that also with with the scriptural mandate for us to realize also that our enemy actually isn't flesh and blood, but principality and power, right? And so when I say enemy, I don't really mean that this person is my enemy or that person is my enemy, but there is something in the zeitgeist of the time that is malevolent, and so I got to be careful to identify what the real enemy is and not put a face on it,
right?
Because that's a different thing.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's confusing. It's hard, right?
Sure is.
It's so complex.
It is, but
and it's stressful for me, right? Because I don't want to say something publicly that means I lose friends. But I also want to be true to my convictions, and so we're now in a time where it's in our neighborhood, it's in our homes, it's at our dinner tables, it's at Christmas, it's everywhere now. This issue.
Absolutely. Well, with that in mind, with open hearts and open minds, let's listen to Long Shadows.
One can tell that the sun is setting on our fare thee well, when our civilization's betting on its moment, casting long shadows. We aspire with the 500 million animals on fire to surmount the consequences of desire behind the earth's sorrows. Those who fall into the pit are finally the ones who dig it. insane, that the nations rage and people plot in vain against the Lord's anointed, saying, let's throw off these shackles. All the while, the one enthroned in heaven casts a smile and terrifies the ones who know their ways are like the jackals. Those who fall into the pit are finally the ones who dig it. To dig it.
Long Shadows, that is off of Steve Bell's newest CD, Wouldn't You Love to Know? We're in conversation with Steve, and that's certainly a song that speaks to our time and some of the struggles that we're dealing with. And we keep coming back to this theme that these songs were not written for COVID; they were written ahead of time, but they're just so relevant to what we're going through. And certainly the next song, Because We Hunkered Down.
Yeah.
How was this not written for COVID? You
Long
can't tell
before
me.
COVID, actually.
How is that possible?
I know. And so the lyric is almost word for word a sonnet that Malcolm Guite, my English
And how much
friend,
do we love Malcolm Guite?
and who doesn't love Malcolm Guite? And so he wrote this ages ago. It connected to a time of life I was in, a struggle that I was kind of going through with friends, and that, you know, we all come to these situations. Well, we're actually in this right now. Mm-hmm. We're in a situation that could destroy beloved and cherished communities. Mm-hmm. And it's ideological, and so this actually does flow from the last.
Well, it's almost like a cause and effect.
Yeah.
Right. Here's the cause. Here's where society is at. Here's where we're struggling. Here's where we're fighting.
Yep.
And then this is sort of the response.
Yep.